Okay, we'll call to order the October 11th, 2011 Placer County Board of Supervisors meeting and start with a flag salute led by Supervisor Montgomery.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Jennifer. And if we have a clerk of the board, that person will read the meeting procedures.
I guess since you weren't going to start on time, Ann.
And Tom, are you going to read our meeting procedures? Sir.
Our clock stopped.
Mine stopped too, but a long time ago.
Now you've offended me.
Yeah. Actually, Montana was fantastic. But it's good to be home. Politician.
Qualifies as pay, though.
Why don't we go around the room and introduce ourselves?
17 years, I've never seen this one before. So, Tony, do you want to read the meeting? That's all right.
Is this a good time for you?
That's not.
It's going to be an interesting day.
Oh, Holly. Welcome to the Placer County Board of Supervisors meeting of Tuesday, October 11th, 2011. Agendas are available on the wall outside this meeting room. If you are here to speak on an issue not appearing on the agenda, you may do so during the public comment period. There's a 3-minute time limit per speaker. The board is not permitted to take action on items addressed under public comment. When you speak, clearly state your name and address for the record. All items on the agenda will be open for the public to address before final action is taken. There's a 3-minute time limit per speaker, which will be monitored by a timer on the podium. If there is a person speaking on behalf of a group with no other testimony from another member of the group, please identify yourself as such, and your time may be extended at the pleasure of the board. Keep in mind that the chairman has discretion of limiting the total discussion time on any item. If you are hearing impaired, we have listening devices available. It is requested that all pagers and cell phones be either turned off or put in the silent mode. Thank you for your participation and cooperation.
Thanks, Ann. Now is the time for public comment. This is a time when anyone from the public can address the board on something that is not on the agenda, keeping in mind that we can take no action. But if there's someone who'd like to address the board on something not on the agenda, please come forward and come forward. Just come up to the microphone and state your name, please.
Morning. My name is Robert Califate. My address is 2004 Spruce Way, Antioch, California. I'm here to talk to you today about a disabled Gulf War veteran in this county that was involved in domestic violence and alcohol treatment. She had a healthy pregnancy, but in month 7 was strangled, and strangled to the point of unconsciousness. She awoke, terrified for the baby in her womb, holding her stomach, crying for the baby to please move, not knowing whether the fetus had been injured or not. She suffered several other beatings, broken bones, and 2 strangulations by the same individual. She had, after the birth, had an obvious postpartum depression. She had domestic violence PTSD on top of a military diagnosed PTSD. After 3 days of alcohol abuse, she voluntarily entered a VA-funded treatment program. She placed the baby with her parents where she lived during her pregnancy. In treatment, she met other women that helped her to learn how to deal with the domestic violence syndrome. She transferred into a second program that offered her a safe house opportunity to bond and live with her own daughter. She filed a restraining order in Placer County Family Court. And in court, the father of the baby perjured himself, denying that domestic violence had ever occurred against she or another victim, even though there were arrests and police photographs. Judge Amaro in that case ordered him repeatedly over 8 months to comply with court orders. He continued to perjure himself repeatedly. The father had an option to test clean, to see the baby. He opted not to see the baby midway through the process. In the meantime, the veteran mother had custody of the daughter and lived in monitored housing for 8 months. She then leased an apartment in Roseville, went to college, and as a single mother obtained a 3.43 GPA. She stayed clean and sober for 20 months until July this year when she relapsed. CPS entered the picture for the very first time ever, gave the drug-using father the baby that he had abandoned 15 months earlier. CPS has disregarded 2 women's court records of domestic violence. They've disregarded police record where he had assaulted his father with a knife. They disregarded the arrest for violation of a restraining order. They disregarded his dirty court-ordered drug tests. They disregarded several perjuries he committed. They disregarded his failures to comply with court orders. We believe CPS has created a liability for Placer County in this case because CPS is not considering the best interest of the child, but rather would prefer to punish the mother for one act of an hour and a half of negligence and disregard the absentee father's 1.5 years of negligence. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else who'd like to address the board on something that is not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will take up supervisor committee reports. Do any of my colleagues have anything to report? Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Many of you probably know that yesterday was the 100th anniversary of the woman's right to vote in California. And I was pleased to attend the ceremony at the state capitol yesterday. There was a celebration in the rotunda. Senator Steinberg addressed the assemblage, as did Assemblyman Roger Dickinson. Later on that evening, there was a reception, and several people portrayed people that were involved in the suffrage movement, Susan B. Anthony, Katie Stanton. Anyhow, I was honored to portray Aaron Augustus Sargent. Now, I know what you're thinking. Who is Aaron Augustus Sargent? He was a congressman from Nevada City, served in the Congress in the 1860s, 1870s, and was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1872. He wrote the original legislation for the 19th Amendment. His wife was a friend of Susan B. Anthony, and so I just wanted to read the 19 words that he proposed in 1878 that is today in the 19th Amendment. The right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. That was introduced every year from 1878 until 1918, when it was finally adopted by the United States Congress. So anyhow, I was pleased to portray him. It was a great event. The Secretary of State was there, made some comments. So congratulations to all you women that are out there and vote. It was a great celebration. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Jennifer.
Mine isn't quite as historic, but it was the 57th running, or 56th, I should say, running of the Tevis Cup this last weekend. It was a very unusual Tevis Cup, as many of you probably know. Canceled in July due to too much snow. Rerouted just this last weekend, once again due to too much snow going over the Sierras. Had a very, very quick race. It was out and back, 50 miles each direction. Started in Auburn, began in Auburn. Next year, our hope and our expectation is that we will begin again at the east end of the county. But very quick race, 12 hours and 31 minutes, I believe, was the finishing time for just about 100 miles on horseback. Wonderful event. It's a Placer County Classic. If you have not seen it, I encourage everyone to go out next year. Forest Hill is an incredible spot to view the riders coming through town, usually at the end of the day. In this case, you got to see them twice. And just, again, if you haven't seen it, get out there and see it. It is truly a Placer County Classic and something that you will not see anywhere else.
Thanks, Jennifer. See no other supervisor committee reports. Next is our consent agenda. This is a list of items that are intended to be taken up all at once, but the board would be happy to pull any items for individual discussion if any of my colleagues wishes to do that, or anyone from the public would like me to do that. Jennifer?
I would actually like to pull items 18A and 20B. I would like some additional information on these that I didn't see in the packet. Otherwise, I would move adoption of the remainder of the consent agenda.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt the consent agenda with the items discussed withdrawn. Roll call, Ann?
Montgomery? Duran? Holmes? Euler? Weigand?
Yes. So item 18A, North Lake Tahoe Resort Association proposed expenditure of budget infrastructure funds.
Yes, Jennifer Merchant's available. Maybe she can give a little bit of background on that one, and I believe we have some representatives, facility services, can talk about the other one.
Great, thank you. And Jennifer, my clarification that I was actually looking for on this is our board report says that this requires the Board of Supervisors approval prior to expenditure from the infrastructure. I know that this facility is actually already up and running at the airport. Have these been expended and we're now kind of taking a rear action guard, or was there some other funds that this came out of and now we're going to pay for it?
No, this is actually funding something that will happen in the future. They had some temporary work done that they had funded with marketing and other funds that they had available, and these funds will be expended in the future once your board takes action today on the permanent capital improvements.
Excellent. I was just concerned that we had the cart before the horse here.
No, we did not.
Thank you. Move approval on 18A in that case.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve item 18A. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And item 20B, Tahoe Administration Roof, Tahoe Administration Center, approve a budget revision of $20,000. Joel?
Yes. Supervisor Montgomery.
Joel, thank you. Again, this is probably a very simple answer. My understanding is that we had allocated, I believe, repairs up to $17,972 on this.
That's correct.
Is this an additional $20,000, or is this $20,000 going to cover that entire amount?
This is an additional $20,000 to the total cost. The $17,972 originally was the landlord, our share of the construction corrections. The additional amount of the $20,000 is about $8,233. Turns out to the landlord, and the remainder of that $20,000 in the budget revision is all of our time and building maintenance time to make other repairs.
So how much did this end up costing the county in total?
For the lease, it's $26,200 roughly,
Okay, so about
which is half of the total cost of
Okay.
the construction.
So about $7,000 above what we had estimated it would cost in total?
Yeah, roughly.
Okay. And what drove that?
When they took off the roof, they discovered some conditions that they hadn't anticipated. There was actually a water line and some additional damage and other replacement of materials they had to take into there. And unfortunately, partially because of the storm, during the middle of this construction, they had to pull in the crane twice. They had to crane it in and then come in twice. So it took extra work from the contractor.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Sure.
I have one question.
Jack?
What is the lease of the building for?
In terms of our use,
Yes.
that is our CDRA, and environmental health is in there. And they've been there for decades, and they will be moving out in June when the lease terminates in June. We're going to be moving them in March as part of moving them to Customs House.
Okay, and just so you know, I didn't see any of that in here. Thank you.
Sure.
So I think we have a motion and a second to approve item 20B. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you.
Now, with perfect timing, Ann, thanks to your assistance, we'll take up our first timed item, which is a presentation commendation congratulating Mark Fowler on his retirement. So, Mark, if I'm going to read this, and then you can come on up to the podium and you can get me back after I take a couple of shots at you. By the way, Mark and I grew up together. He is a year older than me, just for the record, but we both graduated from Lincoln High School a few years ago. So Mark retired, spent his whole career as a teacher at Lincoln High School, 37 years. He, as I mentioned, graduated from Lincoln High School in 1968. Dedicated his life to the enhancement of others through teaching, coaching, community involvement, leadership, and volunteer service. Mark was selected Placer County Teacher of the Year in 1997. He is a naturalist and avid outdoorsman. Mark was instrumental in starting the highly successful Lincoln School Farm Program. It's designed to give students practical experience in the study of agricultural and natural resources. He developed several innovative educational programs at Lincoln High School, including the Outdoor Education Program that takes students all over the western United States to study wildlife, geology, cultural history, Outdoor Education Alumni Program, the Fish Project on the School Farm, Natural History class that has installed wood duck boxes to study wildlife habitat at School Farm, and the Sportsman Legacy Program, which provides students with scholarships for that program. In addition to teaching, Mark coached football for 32 years, continues to serve on various committees for community support, and whereas Mark is described by his coworkers and peers as a man that quietly makes a difference in young people's lives well after they leave school by continually keeping track of their accomplishments and disappointments, offering his wisdom and encouragement whenever possible. He was a mentor for many teachers and set the standard for what a teacher should be. He cared about his students, offered them opportunities to learn in and outside of the classroom, and challenged them to excel in their education to become quality individuals. And therefore, with that, the board awards you this commendation. And I'll pass on, kind of in the spirit of all of this, a comment from a good friend of both Mark's and mine, but one time who said, when we're actually organizing for the Placer Legacy Foundation fundraiser, that you'll never hear anybody say anything negative about Mark Fowler, and there aren't very many people, if you think about it, who actually, but it's absolutely true. So I'm going to violate that and tell you that earlier this summer, with his retirement, Mark probably tried to kill me by taking me into probably the wildest part of Placer County, somewhere out of the Forest Hill area, but we had a great time, and I actually survived and showed him that I wasn't as wimpy as he thought I might be. So with that, Mark, you get a chance to come up to the podium, and I'm going to give you your commendation. Now your turn.
You can say something neat about Robert.
Let's see, what could I say about him surviving the wild Screwauger Canyon and this summer? But if we go way back in the history of our friendship, we did have an activity in high school that's probably resulted in our funky way of life today is that we boxed in a competition in front of a large crowd, and I'm sure both received head injuries that have made us skinny as we are today. So, Robert, thanks for the opportunities that you've given me over the years. So, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. And again, congratulations. Just a great career, wonderful educator, and made a huge difference in a lot of folks' lives. And so, thanks, Mark. Congratulations.
I will mention one other thing is with the years of teaching and volunteer service, if you don't have a good mate to support you, to not be home. So I have a beautiful wife here that supports me over the years, and that kind of makes things a little bit easier.
Congratulations to you too, Patty. Mark and Patty were high school sweethearts. Okay, now we'll take up our 920 item, which is another commendation thanking Dan McBride and his wife Eileen for their contribution towards the development of the Page Fire Station. So same drill. We'll read this commendation, and then you folks can come up to the podium and get back at me. Whereas Dan Ray McBride retired from the Air Force in 1970 after 20 years of service to our country. He spent his career as a firefighter, retiring as a tech sergeant, assistant fire chief at Mather. After his military service, he continued to work at Mather as as driver operator on a crash fire truck until he retired from federal civil service in 1979. Dan and his wife Eileen and their 8 children moved to Lincoln off Nicholas Road on June 15, 1969. Due to a lack of fire service in the area back then, Dan used his firefighting expertise to develop the Page Fire Station in 1981, taking the name from the development known as that since 1912. In May of 1981, Dan and Eileen donated with a free lease agreement their privately owned 1939 Dodge Van Pelt structural pumper fire engine to Placer County for use at the new fire station until the permanent truck arrived later that year. In 1981, Dan and Eileen donated their barn as a firehouse until the original 2-stall fire station was completed that year, a parcel across the street donated by the Bonifield family, actually. Pictured above in the commendation is Daniel McBride in the 1939 Dodge fire engine that he donated. With all that, he later served under Warren Bostic, who captained the Page Fire Station, and Warren's here in the audience also. But Dan, Eileen, thank you very much. It's that kind of community involvement that obviously in this case helped really nurture and get Placer County Fire off of the ground, and which is now a terrific program that provides a high level of service at a very affordable cost. But more than that, the fire stations that we have in rural Lincoln are community centers to the folks who live out there, and a reflection, I think, of community involvement and participation. So I'm going to bring down the commendation, and you folks can also come up to the podium. Excuse me. Bless you. Welcome to say a few words if you like.
Well, actually, when I moved out there, we had no fire protection on the west side of town because of if there was a train across the tracks, we was hurting. So I bought this fire truck and restored it, and one of the forestry people, Mark Lanier, asked me if I'd be interested in starting a volunteer fire department, and I told him I would. And we used my barn. And being retired medically from civil service, I couldn't actually become an active fireman, but I could train. And I used my knowledge to train some of the firemen that had no experience, the basic fundamentals of firefighting and the operation of my truck. And we used it until we got a better truck, a newer truck from State Forestry. And actually, I became a fireman when I was 14 years old. I enlisted in the Air Force, and I stayed 7 months until they found out I was too young, and they gave me a minority honorable discharge. But as soon as I was 17, I came back and made a career out of it, and I'll always be a fireman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Warren, Warren would like to make a couple of comments.
If I may make a comment or two about Dan and Eileen. In moving to Placer County in 1976, I had no idea that the next few years would change my entire life. Meeting the McBrides taught me how to do farm work, and in 1981 he talked me into getting involved with the fire service, and I guess I'll blame him for the 30 years that I've been in the fire service. But it was wonderful to grow up, to raise my kids around Dan and his family. He set a goal for the area and was certainly a role model for my family and a role model for me in the fire service. And I just want to thank Dan and Eileen and their family for what they've done for Placer County.
Thanks, Warren. Congratulations and thank you. So we will now take up our first department item, which is Community Development Resources at Eastern Placer County Biomass Project. And Jerry and Brett, I think, have a... Where is Brett?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable Board. We're here today for a topic of some familiarity, Eastern Placer County Biomass Project. As you all recall, on August 4th, 2011, TRPA issued a formal confirmation of their decision to remove Kings Beach Biomass Facility from further consideration. Because this was a joint environmental document, and because we also needed, the project would have required approval of a public service project application from TRPA. Placer County could not proceed with the project. And in light of this, on August 9th, 2011, your board directed staff, this is at a hearing up in Squaw Valley, the board directed staff to withdraw the Lake Tahoe Basin Biomass Project. At that hearing, we also received direction to prepare a new contract for the preparation of an environmental impact report or an environmental assessment, and to process a land use application for a facility to be located in eastern Placer County but outside the Tahoe Basin. The Department of Energy grant that we have results in a NEPA nexus, and it's anticipated that, once again, environmental assessment would be sufficient for this purpose. The site we began analyzing was the Eastern Regional Material Recovery and Landfill site. It had been analyzed in the previous EIR as a material storage facility, and this was intended to hold the winter months' supply of material that would then be transported to Kings Beach. County-owned property includes the landfill, the materials recovery facility, maintenance facility for Tahoe Area Regional Transit, 3 caretaker residences, and an inert processing area. The site is zoned forest, special purpose. That's a site that does allow for electric power generation in Placer County with approval of a conditional use permit. Here's the ERL site right here. You can actually see it from space. Just south of Truckee, closer to Truckee than it is to Tahoe City, and just north of Squaw Valley there. The project essentially is more or less the same as it was being proposed in Kings Beach. It's a 2 to 3 megawatt biomass energy facility to be located at this site. About approximately 6,700 square foot facility with about a 5,000 square foot covered material storage area and an open, uncovered 1.5 acre material storage area. Entitlements, as I mentioned, would be a conditional use permit. Also, there would be an authority to construct permit that's required from Placer County Air Pollution Control District. This is a closer image of the site. Down here is the MRF. Here's the TART facility over here. And these are the 3 locations that we're proposing for analysis here. There are more than one potential development site. There is more than one potential development site on the property. These are some of the project attributes as we see them. It's pretty much isolated from outside residential development. The biomass facility is compatible with the existing industrial uses on the site. It's easily accessible for truck traffic. Infrastructure is mostly in place. And the site is otherwise well suited for the use. These are some pictures, some images of the Cabin Creek site. Up here is the inert processing area. This is the caretaker's residence that's down identified as location E on your site plan. The caretaker's residence could be moved, and that's a site that's right as you enter the facility. It's pretty easily accessible. It means we wouldn't have to be driving our trucks up through their weigh stations, and makes it a lot simpler for us for processing. Typical environmental issues that'll be analyzed in the EIR. should state that should have been corrected. It's not an EIS, but an EIR. Most of these have been looked at already, so we've got a pretty good sense of what's going on out there. Given that we're looking at Site E versus Site B, there'd be a few additional analyses, but for the most part, most of it's been looked into. So at this time, we're requesting your direction once again. Here to provide direction to proceed with the preparation. Actually, we've already prepared the contract, but the preparation of an environmental document and submittal of a conditional use permit application to allow for the development of a biomass power generation facility to be located at the Eastern Regional Landfill. And also, we need your permission or your direction to authorize the board chairman to sign a contract with Ascent Environmental. Not here, but probably listening, I assume, in an amount not to exceed $198,935, and this would be for the preparation of an environmental impact report and environmental assessment for the project. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm not sitting at the thing, so Kirk.
Yeah, if you would, please, just a moment on kind of the economics behind this at this point, and the proposed purchaser of the electricity that's going to be generated at the plant. We had preliminary conversations. They give us an understanding of what we're looking at by way of ROI on this project, how long to break even, all those things. I mean, I know that we had one understanding over the Kings Beach site based on the existing operation going on over there. I'm just not familiar with the economics as it pertains to this location.
Thank you for the question. Rather than misinform you, I'll answer the questions regarding it.
You'll let Mr. Story do it.
Right.
Thanks. Brett Story, Placer County Planning Department. Thank you for your question. The economics are potentially a little different. Our partner is still, depending on what document you look at, they're either Liberty Energy, Calpico, but they are still our private partner. In fact, I had a good discussion with their president and CEO last week. All of the economic analysis that we will finally perform is entirely dependent on the site. So while we've prepared and we've got a look at a pro forma that would allow us to generate electricity as part owners, obviously they would own their own electricity. Ours we would sell back to Calpico. Our renewable energy credits we would get, we would also sell back to Calpico. But it's entirely dependent on the infrastructure costs and the environmental costs of this site. So again, as we were before, we wait until we have the EIR complete and understand what our mitigation is. I will tell you that there are some differences between the sites. For one, the additional heat that this facility would generate has no real market at Cabin Creek, so we are already down some economics there. However, there is a trade. We no longer have to build to TRPA standards, so the building does not have to be as tight. We could essentially save some money there. But again, it will come down to what are the environmental mitigations that come with the site. So once Ascent has completed their project, we go through the public review and we understand what those are. That will be folded into a final pro forma that will allow the county and Calpico to decide whether or not to build the project. Just in general terms, I'll tell you that normal energy projects such as this are around 13 cents per kilowatt. Natural gas is about 4, which is generally what it competes against, about 4 cents a kilowatt. We, at the Kings Beach site, had it in the neighborhood of 8 to 9 cents per kilowatt. I can't tell you today what Cabin Creek would look like without all this information, but that is in the slot, if you will, that Calpico is willing to pay for renewable energy electricity. Their mandate has gone from 20% to 33% by 2020, so they're in need of this type of power, but they also recognize that they have an investment in this, and at that point in time, the payback will be determined, and we will share that with the board when we get there. I hope that answers enough of your question.
Based on the information that's available to you, I guess that's
yes.
where we are with the answer.
Okay.
Jack.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify for the record, this may be directed to Lauren. You're doing an EIR under the California Environmental Qualities Act and an EA under the National Environmental Policy Act, right?
That's correct.
Jim, then Jennifer.
Well, I just wanted to point out that $198,935 is coming from the Department of Energy grant that Senator Feinstein secured for us.
Good point. Jennifer.
Yeah, and I wanted to just get back, again, as Brett pointed out, until we actually go through the process and have a more solid understanding of what the specific proposal is, what the specific technology is, and what the environmental costs are going to end up being. I think it's important to note that on page 43 of our board packet, it's numbered page 5 of this specific staff report, item 6. One of the things that's brought out here is it's said that this will allow for more flexibility in building size, shape, and height, will allow staff to include more technology possibilities, which I think is terrific, and potentially reduce the construction costs of the building. And I think it is important to, point out that we're still early in this process, and it may be more expensive, it may be less expensive, which is going to have an impact on the price per kilowatt hour. In terms of the additional heat and sales, my understanding and my recollection is we weren't actually talking about that as part of the Kings Beach project. That was just something that was very potential for the future. Is that right?
Something in the potential, in the future possibly.
Okay. And then I also understand that we've had some preliminary conversations with the transit folks up there about potentially heating their building at some point in the future. So, again, all very nebulous and just really dependent upon what, if anything, we end up with on the ground there. But, I'm very excited at the thought of moving forward with a project here. I think it's a great spot. I think we have a great partner with CalPeco, or, again, Liberty, whatever we're calling them today. And I'm just really, really tickled pink that we're going to be able to move forward with this.
I agree. I think with our second run at an environmental document, this one should go a little smoother.
Any other questions or comments by board members? Is there anyone from the public who'd like to address this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. As I read the staff report, you are seeking direction from the board in light of the transition that this issue has gone through, but to proceed with the submittal of a conditional use permit at the Eastern Regional Material Facility, as well as the environmental review, and approve a contract with Ascent Environmental for that document not to exceed $198,935. Is that everything? Okay, pleasure of the board.
So moved. Thank you.
I have moved and seconded to approve staff recommendation just discussed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks. We will now take up our 9:30 timed item, which is Public Works, dissolution of zone of benefit, County Service Area 28, Chelsea Downs North, and dissolution of zone of benefits 152 County Area, same issue. Bob, there you are.
Good morning, Bob Costa, Public Works Department. Originally scheduled this morning was a request for your board to consider a resolution of intention to dissolve the County Service Area 28, Zone of Benefit 152 for the Chelsea Downs North subdivision. The process prescribed by state law requires that you hold 2 public hearings, the second of which has to be heard within 30 to 60 days of the initial action. Because of some recent changes in the scheduling of your future meetings, we're not going to be able to comply with those legal requirements if we hold the hearing today. So for that reason, we're asking that you continue this item to November 8th at 9:30 a.m. so that we can then target the December 13th board agenda for the follow-up action.
Thanks, Bob. Any questions, comments? Anyone from the public wish to address this? Again, the request is for a continuance. Moved and seconded to continue the Chelsea Downs North dissolution. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Bob. We'll next take up department item number 7, which is the North Lake Tahoe Resort Association agreement contract in the amount of $5,430,703, and Jennifer Merchant. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Wygant, members of the board. Again, Jennifer Merchant with the County Executive Office. The agreement with the North Lake Tahoe Resort Association before your consideration today would allocate $5,430,703 in transient occupancy tax funds for the promotion of tourism and visitor-serving capital projects and transit operations in eastern Placer County. The primary task of the Resort Association is to promote tourism and provide guidance to the Board of Supervisors on infrastructure or capital projects and visitor support service expenditures. The recommended agreement amount will fund administrative costs, direct marketing program research, visitor information, transit services, and various capital projects. The budget is about $340,000 higher than last year's budget as a result of higher than expected TOT collections in eastern Placer County last fiscal year. This agreement commits TOT funds to maintain important base level county services in Tahoe as well, in addition to Tahoe TOT funds typically allocated to county departments for operations and maintenance of visitor serving facilities. Up to $800,000 in TOT funds will be allocated this year to maintain base Tahoe Health Clinic, TART bus, and public safety services. Additionally, all Tahoe TOT funds allocated to the infrastructure account for capital expenditures will be held in reserve at least through mid-year for possible allocation to fund other Tahoe essential services such as snow removal and transit in the event of further state budget cuts to these programs. The agreement also includes a $150,000 reserve fund for the maintenance of tourism-serving facilities. This year's contract allows for growth in the Resort Association's marketing programs that are targeted toward defending and maintaining important drive-up markets, re-engaging destination visitors, and allocates additional TOT revenue to fund key special events. In order to provide the agreed-upon services, the contract budget allocates funds to the following resource categories: $2.8 million for marketing, $1.2 million for visitor support and transportation, and $1.5 million for capital improvements. So our recommendation today is to approve the agreement in the amount of $5.4 million. And at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions by board members of Jennifer? Jennifer has a question of Jennifer.
Jennifer has a question of Jennifer, yes. The dollars that are allocated for one-time maintenance expenses, the $150,000.
Yes.
What is our expectation as to how those will be used? What are we envisioning when we're talking about one-time maintenance expenses?
Well, I can tell you last year we had a smaller fund available for that, and the only maintenance that it was used for was for preparing bike trails, removing snow and dirt and that sort of thing for the Amgen race. So it's really supposed to be for one-time needs, not everyday regular maintenance, but for larger things that need to be done occasionally.
So our expectation would be that it would not be used for things like sweeping the bicycle paths, but for clearing them potentially initially at the beginning of the season?
Yes.
Okay. Had a couple other questions on that. I know that the contract discussion has been somewhat contentious in the past. How just generally, how was the tone of the discussion, and was the Resort Association largely supportive of Placer County's position?
Yeah, I think that every year there are certain items that come up that we need to have a little bit more detailed discussion on. I think overall the board was in support of most of the concepts that our department had put forth for their consideration, and ultimately they did sign the agreement, did vote to approve the agreement, so I think it was a good result.
Yeah, and I will note that my aide was actually at the meeting where they did sign the agreement, and there was almost zero discussion about the contract. It moved through the Resort Association board very quickly. I'm assuming they're not here today because of the situation on the freeway, because I would have expected someone to be here.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard
Okay.
Or maybe they just think it's so great that they don't need to be making comments.
That's why we call you Pollyanna, Jennifer.
Yeah, that's right.
One of the questions that seems to just come up year over year is as it relates to basic county services and the role of TOT in supporting basic county services. Can you just give a little bit of a clarification on how and why it's appropriate to use TOT for those basic county services rather than for the specific pieces that the Resort Association sees it as applying to?
Sure. I think it's probably first and foremost important to point out that the collection of this TOT is for general purpose, for the general fund. We do this annual agreement to allocate it for visitor-serving capital projects as well as marketing because we find that to be important services to provide in that area. But really the approval by the voters of this additional 2% of TOT was specifically so that the funds could be spent in North Lake Tahoe. So they do go into the county's general fund, and they can be expended on any kind of county services provided in eastern Placer County as long as it's within the district of collection. A few years ago when the state budget started having difficulties and we started retracting expenditures in the Tahoe area on certain services, those services were basically saved because we did have these TOT monies that we could allocate to provide those services. And specifically that was for the dental clinic in the Tahoe area and for the community-oriented policing staff person in the Tahoe area, as well as base transit services that were pulled back because of a decline in sales tax revenue.
Okay, and last but certainly not least, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, as relates to the community service officer or the POPS officer, any possibility that with the new grant funding that we just received for that program that we talked about at our last board meeting, that some of this funding that we have allocated for county services through the general fund can be put back into some of the other things that the Resort Association does instead of paying for that officer?
We'll take a look. Jennifer's not aware of that. We'll take a look at that in terms of if there's any constraints on the grant that it's not supposed to supplement other fiscal year expenditures. Usually they come with those kind of requirements, but that's definitely worth looking into.
Absolutely. I just thought it's definitely worth just looking over to see if there's some opportunities to use some of this otherwise general fund money for some other things there.
Oh, I did want to go back to the maintenance dollars, $150,000, just to clarify that that was supposed to be one-time unusual expenses, not routine, such as opening up all of the bike paths on an annual basis. That would probably be viewed as something we would need to sit down and talk to the Resort Association. That was specifically for the Amgen tour, not to be done every year. This was also if air conditioning units go out on the convention center or those kind of things that are a tremendous expense that was not budgeted by the district that maintains that. Those were the examples of this one-time maintenance dollars. But I just did want to clarify that their expectation was not to annually open up the bike trails with this kind of money.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you, because that was actually my next clarification, because I heard one thing, $75,000 used to open up the bike trails, but it didn't sound to be maintenance related, but I think you just cleared that up. Thank you.
So I see no other questions, comments by board members. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to address this item? Seeing none, I will bring it back to the board for consideration. That was a really good comment, Jennifer. That.
Thank you, Jennifer. I move we approve the agreement with the North Lake Tahoe Resort Association in the amount of $5,430,703 for fiscal year 2011-12 to promote tourism and provide guidance to the Board of Supervisors on infrastructure project expenditures.
Moved and seconded to approve staff recommendation with the just discussed and delineated contract with the Resort Association. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll now take up the next department item, which is revenue sharing. And Holly, you're going to present that?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Good morning.
Good morning and welcome back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. It's so good to be back.
I knew it was. The item before you concerns allocation of revenue-sharing funds that your board has discussed previously. Today, we're asking you to consider options for allocation of revenue-sharing funds to provide for program administration and provide direction to staff as may be appropriate. As you are all aware, the revenue-sharing program provides for limited financial contributions to community-based organizations or private nonprofits or programs or other sorts of needs, leveraging funding in a range of activities that support local communities. Each year, $100,000 is allocated or appropriated in the county budget, and $20,000 per district is assumed. The Board of Supervisors has previously expressed interest in revising the process for allocation of these funds with an eye towards added transparency, maximizing public involvement and oversight, and more efficient use of staff time or committee time and cost efficiencies or effectiveness. Following discussion of options in August, the board directed staff to return for consideration of these options by the full board and to suspend the program until such time that the board had further discussion. So we are before you today so that your board may further discuss what alternatives we have for program administration and identify or confirm criteria for that consideration. Obviously, the elements of transparency and public oversight and efficient use of staff time are all important in considering allocation of funds. The three alternatives provide varying degrees of each of these elements or various approaches for each of these elements in terms of what would be implemented. What's identified in your board packet as alternative one is basically the existing process where members of the Board of Supervisors receive applications for funding. The board members and staff review those applications and nominate an organization's application to the full board to be considered for funding. The funded requests are then placed on the county website, and the unfunded requests remain in the clerk of the board's office for review by the public as they may find interest in doing so. It should also be noted that revenue sharing funds for District 5 have been handled somewhat differently, and in the last year were dedicated to programs through the Health and Human Services budget that basically benefited local community, I will say. This same process could be followed in any district as may be desired by the district supervisor and approved by the full board. Alternative two, I know we went over it in August, but I'm going to include a little discussion here. This methodology would include the establishment of a committee that is comprised of public interest groups and representatives of various other functional areas. The purpose of this committee would be to review and make recommendations on funding requests and provide oversight on expenditure of funds. Basically, the process would go as follows. The applications would be submitted to the district board member by eligible organizations. The board member would refer applications to the committee. The committee would develop recommendations on projects, programs, or funding contributions as nominated by the district supervisor, and then the full board would consider and take action on the recommended funding. Important here is that review of this funding would occur on a quarterly basis rather than on any given board meeting, so you would be limiting the time frames for consideration of these awards. It's anticipated that it would minimize the number of times items would appear on the board's agenda for consideration of revenue sharing funds and minimize staff time and oversight. In addition, it's anticipated and was proposed as increasing public oversight and input into the process. The third basic alternative or general alternative that's before you it really is kind of a middle ground, and it includes elements of the existing process and the approach proposed under Alternative 2. Likewise, this would result in increased transparency from the existing process and provide greater opportunities for public input. Under this alternative, the application for funding would still be submitted to the district supervisor that meets identified criteria. The applications would be posted for a 14-day review period on the county website, and public comments solicited. At the close of the comment period, the district supervisor would make a recommendation to the board for funding or not. The item would be placed on the agenda and considered by the full board. The recommendation of the district supervisor would be posted next to the item after the 14-day comment period, along with any comment the supervisor would like to make in support or opposition of the request. Again, we believe this would increase the opportunities for public input and oversight of the existing process. Another part of the discussion that was before your board was the type of criteria that might be considered in developing these recommendations. Staff has proposed criteria based on some discussion at prior board meetings. What we've identified here is that the board member would consider whether it supports core county functions, and I think core was left out of the board report, and I think that's important, that it supports core county function would be an item that the board may consider. Whether it leverages existing dollars, enhances further funding opportunities, supports public-private partnerships, promotes economic development efforts, or enhances regional and interjurisdictional programs. With that, we believe that all three alternatives would be workable. I mean, any given one of them or variations of any one of them could certainly be implemented and be workable by staff. The costs are nominal for any one of them. The more you move to certain types of review or more intensive review, the greater the staff costs. But in any case, we would not anticipate that the full cost for administering the program would be more than $7,500 a year. With that, we're requesting that the board consider the background information, the alternatives that are before you, and discuss those alternatives and provide direction to staff to not to return, but to implement the preferred alternative for administration of the revenue sharing program, develop the implementation details as may be appropriate, and affirm criteria board members may consider in developing those funding recommendations. And with that, I would invite, obviously the board can make whatever comments they find necessary, but I would suggest that maybe Supervisor Duran would want to comment on his prior proposal, because I do want to make sure that I characterized it appropriately, and if so I
Sure.
inviting any questions or comments.
Sure. Again, I do want to thank you for putting this together. I also want to thank my fellow supervisors for engaging in this discussion. A couple of things. The first thing is that I had a couple of goals here in bringing this particular item up. The first one is to have the discussion, which is especially timely, seeing what we're going through financially, what everybody's going through financially. The second thing is to take a look at what things that we can add to an existing program that has some very significant and honorable roots. And I think, as I've mentioned time and time again, I don't have a problem in, when times are good, helping out others with the excess that we have from a governmental standpoint. But during very difficult times, it makes it difficult to write that check when you don't know whether or not you have the money in the bank. And if I do write that check, what does that make me, and what does that say about me if I can't afford to pay it? So that being said, again, I brought forward a couple of different thoughts. The first one was a wholesale one-year refraining from bringing forward. I do want to commend the board for taking some time out to reflect on this. It wasn't as long as I would have preferred the timeout to be, but it's a timeout nonetheless. The second thing is that I've put forward a couple of ideas with regards to what we can do to make the program a little bit more better, a little bit more transparent. Seeing that we have two individual trains going down separate tracks. And from a governmental standpoint, that just doesn't, to me, doesn't look efficient, doesn't look effective. It may work for the constituencies that it's working for, but I would like to see us to move together down one track. That's why I looked forward and proposed item number 2. What we're doing is providing the opportunity for citizens who the money belongs to come in and participate in this process, which I don't think is a bad thing. It's their money. They should have an opportunity to take a look at what we're doing and help us make that decision. So that being said, I think I like the proposal number 3. There's a lot of good things in proposal number 3. I just don't think it goes the extra step. I would, though, consider adding that 14-day window of opportunity for folks to look at the proposals to item 2 if that in any way makes it stronger or helps out with the discussion. But again, I'm open to listening to what my fellow supervisors have to say about the issue, and really ready to make a decision and move on with our business.
Jim.
Supervisor Duran, who do you anticipate serving on this committee?
I would think a representative from each one of our districts would be, someone that we can grab from, for example, your district, my district, and helping out.
So you recommend a 5-member?
Yeah, 5, and I would actually like optimally to be 5 members of 1 member from each district, and maybe 2 other unidentified members of the public, maybe someone from a taxpayer group or so on, to add a little bit more oversight.
The potential problem I see with that is, particularly in Auburn, which I represent until a few minutes from now. There are so many active people in the Auburn community. They're involved in the Chamber of Commerce, they're involved in service clubs. And one of the items that we are requested is funding for the 4th of July celebration from the Auburn Chamber of Commerce. So someone that's active in the community more than likely would be involved in the service club or on the Auburn Chamber of Commerce. Does that preclude them from being on this committee?
No, I wouldn't think so at all. That's why we have 7. So if there is a situation where someone feels that there may be a conflict, they could maybe just say, I abstain from this particular issue.
And that just makes it, to me, that just makes it a little bit more difficult, a little bit more convoluted. As you probably guess, I prefer the system as it is now. If the board district supervisor wishes not to participate, they certainly have that right. And I don't think in the last year, what was the total spend out of the revenue sharing? It was around $60,000.
Yeah.
If I remember right. So, anyhow, that's my suggestion to continue as well. As far as the item alternative 3, if you want to post it for 14 days on the county website, that's fine with me. But that's my comments. Alternative 2 just takes too convoluted. You got to send out invitations to these members to show up and set up a meeting, so it's going to involve more staff time. And then on a quarterly basis, that just doesn't work. Some organizations would need that funding maybe sooner than that. So, and I don't see any, there's been said that this is a slush fund. It's not a slush fund. It's not patronage. It's bringing items forward that enhance the community, brings people together. The Festival of Lights Parade, for example, in the city of Auburn, the city does in-kind donations with traffic control and sheriffs or police officers. I think the county should participate in that, and I think what the recommendation that I requested was $750. I think that's a minor amount for something that brings in people throughout the county. I mean, there's an estimate of 30,000 people coming into the area. It brings the community together. People work on this trip. They get to know each other. It increases the value of the participation of all the people that are involved, and it gives families a chance to come together and see what a great area we have. So that's my comments. Again, I still prefer alternative 1, but I'll be willing to listen to the rest of the board discussion.
Jennifer.
Thank you. I think you all know that my my direction that I was interested in going on this was really, frankly, just either doing away with it entirely or suspending it until such time as the county's in somewhat better economic health, even though it is a small portion of our county budget. Holly, I had a question for you. On Alternative 2, you said the committee would include representatives of public interest groups. I think we would understand that that would be someone from each of the districts. But then you also say, and other various functional areas. What does that mean?
Yeah, at one point there was discussion that representatives, say, from a health and human services interest group or other sorts of core functions, maybe it's a law enforcement or chamber of commerce, so it was really just to identify a functional approach as opposed to specific representatives from district. So it was kind of leaving it open for the board to choose who they thought might best represent the types of funding components they'd be interested in.
But not county staff. That was not your
No. I mean, well, it could be if that would be your desire, but it was not intended in that way.
Okay. My take on this is I think Alternative 3 is pretty unwieldy. Alternative 1, the existing process, you all know that I'm not happy with at the moment, so I'm not even going to go there. Alternative 2 is very similar, actually, to what the former supervisor set up with the committee for District 5. It was actually a pretty smooth, pretty simple, pretty easy process. I never actually even saw the applications. They went straight to the committee, and I didn't see them until the rest of this board saw them when they were brought to us for final approval. We did meet, I believe, every 3 months. It was a problem for a very few number of groups who, frankly, just didn't get their stuff in on time. We did have, I believe, 1 or 2 instances where someone on that committee did have to recuse themselves because they had a personal interest in the group that was applying for funds. But it really never presented much of an impediment to approving or denying, because that committee did deny a number of requests as well. Never really presented an impediment to approving the applications that were brought in front of that group. So having said that, I could live with Alternative 2. I am not thrilled about it, but I certainly could live with it. In terms of the criteria for consideration, Holly, you're asking that we give direction regarding developing, implementing details as may be appropriate. I would like to do that, but I'd like to have that, if we settle on 2 or any of these today, I would like to have those implementation details brought back to our board for ratification so that we all understand what that's going to be, and we all express either our support for it or opposition to it, just so we're very clear and on the record for that. And the same for the criteria for the funding recommendations. Those are my comments.
Supervisor, I did have a question. With regards to the particular committee that is utilized in your district, is that a Brown Act committee or is that a non-Brown Act committee?
I believe it is a Brown Act committee. We were very clear that they were not to communicate to each other in advance of what was a publicly noticed meeting. I don't think we ever had anyone actually show up to it other than the individuals who were asking for the funds. But it was publicly noticed both on the county webpage and on paper.
Great. Thank you for clarifying.
Mm-hmm.
Kirk.
Yeah, along those lines, if I could just clarify. So that committee was subject to the Brown Act, which required public notification, gathered on a quarterly basis to analyze requests received throughout the quarter, and yet somehow Alternative 3 is unwieldy, when Alternative 3 only requires that it be posted on the internet for 14 days. It's easier to convene a committee subject to the Brown Act on a quarterly basis to analyze these requests. That's somehow less cumbersome than just posting something on the internet. I'm a little confused by that.
I'm not sure that posting something on the internet meets the transparency goals that Supervisor Duran was really looking for.
No, it may not, but you dismissed Alternative 3 by simply saying it was unwieldy, and
Quite frankly, in terms of implementation, I believe that Alternative 3 is far simpler than Alternative 2.
And be that as it may, I have additional concerns with it as well. I don't think it has the transparency, and my concern about that is that we end up with the situation that we often see in newspapers and online blogs with people posting comments that are not really germane to the request, but are essentially taking pot shots at groups or individuals. And I do have some concerns about that and how we would handle that from a legal perspective.
Okay. Holly, what was our general fund this year?
Oh, shoot. Yeah, 360 some odd million.
360 million. And how many votes of this board does it require in order to authorize a general fund expenditure?
Well, 4/5 really, if you do a budget revision.
To do but consistent with
Yeah.
the budget that we adopted. When we adopted the budget, it required how many votes in the affirmative in order to set that budget?
Actually, it only considers three
Three.
in the final adoption.
3. So every year, and the general fund is largely consistent of dollars that are unencumbered by other requirements placed on us by the state and fed. That's generally the fund through which the board gets to set our spending priorities and say, this is where we think it's appropriate to be spending our money. So technically, by virtue of this definition and the criteria for consideration, all $360 million in the general fund is subject to revenue sharing criteria. Essentially, that's the pot from which we do our revenue sharing. It only takes 3 votes of the board in order to allocate that $360 million on an annual basis. So $360 million is technically revenue sharing. Our board collectively says we have a priority for how we're going to spend this money. The same criteria applies to this $100,000 on an annual basis that we've decided to set aside, still subject to 3 votes of the board, but with a recommendation or a request associated with it from typically an individual supervisor, placing it in front of the board at the request of a qualified community group, organization, effort, whatever the case may be. So on an annual basis, in this year, for instance, this $100,000 that we included in our budget, a budget in which I would add, we added back almost $6 million into reserves. In spite of the fact that we set aside $100,000 for this program, we added back almost $6 million to our reserves. This $100,000 represents a little bit, approximately 1/300th of 1% of our general fund. And as I did before, I would invite those people who make their comments in certain mediums that have been mentioned here. I would invite those people to really engage the process that this board goes through on an annual basis, this year through a series of over a dozen meetings on our budget. I would invite them to engage the process the board goes through. Unfortunately, it seems like every year now in discussing compensation with our bargaining groups. I would invite them to engage that process where real, meaningful spending commitments get made, and recognize that this board has demonstrated in very tough times a willingness and ability to make tough calls, and that while some might view the discretionary expense of 1/300th of 1% of our general fund as egregious, I'd say that we're kind of straining at a gnat in our neighbor's eye when we might have a log in our own. We have done, I believe, as a board, a very good job of being willing to take a lot of tough political hits by virtue of votes that we've made. And there is absolutely nothing associated with revenue sharing
that in any way, shape, or form exempts this board from the responsibility that we have on every single vote that we cast in regard to the budget. And so I would encourage each supervisor as we move forward to continue to vote their conscience when it comes to revenue sharing requests. If you don't like the form or function, vote against it. That's your right. That's your duty as a supervisor. But I think that revenue sharing over the years has proven a very effective way for the board to, in a number of areas, partner with private sector service deliverers to continue to help provide services that, in at least all the instances that I recommend out of the $20,000 that is allocated for District 4, are, I believe, appropriate functions of government. I don't put them forward if I don't believe they are. And so I actually worked to construct Alternative 3 with staff because I do believe Alternative 3 provides a better level of transparency than we have today by making sure that prior to anything being considered by this board, that it is posted on a website that is readily available and easily found, that website contain the information of what organization is making a request for how much money, whatever their justification is for making that request, of which supervisor they're making the request, and which supervisor is placing it up for consideration. And that supervisor that places it up for consideration then has their reasoning or the ability to provide their reasoning as to why they think it's an appropriate expense of public funds in response to comments that might be posted. Obviously, if the board has an obligation in kind of, I don't know, kind of like the FCC has an obligation to make sure the airwaves remain clean of certain language. Obviously, the board would have an obligation to make sure that posts aren't completely unfettered. So I would hope that we'd be able to deal with that concern. But all in all, I think that this board over the years has shown very good fiscal restraint in how we manage the public dollar. I think that where in the past I have had concerns about the recommendation for an individual expenditure, I have voiced those concerns and I have voted accordingly. And I'm confident that my colleagues will continue to do so. And so I am in support of us moving forward with the revenue sharing program as outlined under Alternative 3.
Okay, so I'll complete the board discussion by throwing in my comments, but then keeping in mind, obviously, open it up to the public and or further dialogue by the board. So I guess framing from my perspective starts with the question of whether or not it is an affordable program, and I think Kirk essentially hit the nail on the head as it related to how this is such a small fraction of our general fund. I think if you look at our total budget, it's somewhere in the 1/100% of our overall budget, if I did my calculations correctly. So is it affordable, and does it create value in the context, in the proportion of all that we do? And for me, the answer is clearly yes. One of the perhaps the strongest attribute of the program is its streamlined nature, in my view. There's been a lot of discussion about this, and oftentimes I think some misdirected comments for a range of reasons. But the program, in fact, is very streamlined and very cost-effective, and it's not bureaucratic. Board members have an allocation of potential money that they can consider under specific guidelines going to nonprofits, but a board member in a very efficient manner brings back that recommendation to the rest of their colleagues for consideration. And so the board is essentially agreeing to spend or not these monies very effectively. So for me, the question is, particularly in this climate, do we want to make contributions to nonprofits in accordance with the guidelines and the restrictions that exist? And for me, the answer is in proportion to our budget, particularly now during times like this, we should be considering that. It is important to note, as compared to some comments that have been made in prior discussions here by some members of the public, the county's budget is in extremely good shape. Financially, we are a very healthy government, and we simply can afford this process. So then the question for me is, if we create more of a burden in delivering it, it diminishes one of the critical attributes of the program itself. So I'm okay with option 1. I'm fine with option 3, the notion of going to a committee and creating the costs that accrue to that. I think start to erode the efficiencies and effectiveness of the program itself. As it should be, over time, ultimately, we are all held accountable, I think, very effectively by the voters for the decisions that we make and the way we conduct ourselves, and I'm very much at peace with that. And here is a program where that is very clear and very crisp and very efficient. So those are my comments at this particular point in time. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to address this item? See none, we get to figure out what to do with all this.
Chairman, I move
Kirk.
approval alternative 3.
It's been moved and seconded to approve staff's recommendation identified as alternative 3. Roll call vote, Ann?
Aye.
No.
Holmes? Montgomery? No. Wygant?
Yes. Thanks. Motion passes.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, we'll come back addressing some of the issues about the posting, the process by which that would occur, and any restrictions on that, such as should individuals use their real name when they put a post in, something like that.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah. In light of the vote, I would like to direct staff that the portion of the revenue share that is directed to District 1 be allocated to HHS. Okay.
Thank you very much. And I would like to make the same direction for District 5's portion. Good.
So just for clarification's sake, since that is a budget revision, that will require a 4/5 vote of our board in order to send that $40,000 from individual community organizations to HHS for that purpose, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, all right.
So it'd be okay if we bring that back with the final recommendation from staff, and we could take that up probably more efficiently. And
I just want to clarify, if those funds are allocated to HHS, will they come back to the board for approval? I know when Supervisor Montgomery did that the last time, they didn't come back to the board.
Right, and really, it depends upon the type. I mean, HHS has many, many different programs, and some are direct funding of outside agencies. So it really depends upon the type of request or function within HHS to which it is funded. Some would require a budget revision, some may not, but if it's your board's desire to come back with a budget revision that would appropriate the dollars in HHS for their direction to fund programs, then that would be a budget revision.
Tony has a comment.
To not oversimplify this, but infinitely can get complex, the budget has adopted that each supervisor has $20,000 on which to expend it. Each revenue sharing requires a vote, and that vote is executed on a majority vote. So it would be an unusual item for me to see if an individual supervisor that has already received a $20,000 allocation determined that they were going to spend it collectively on 5 different areas within county government, required anything more than a 3-person vote. Because it's not a budget revision, in my opinion. It's just an allocation under the revenue sharing program, like every other revenue sharing program vote that occurs and has historically occurred for the last 15, 20 years. Now, if something special comes along and you're going to revise the HHS budget as a result, rather than make a donation to the HHS, I guess HHS may require some sort of budget revision. But I'm sure that can be structured to be nothing more than an allocation of the existing budget process.
Okay.
And I would amend that this does come back to the board for the 3/5 vote, if that is indeed the requirement for this.
In light of having stumbled upon a very provocative and technical question, it appears, if it's okay, unless there's an objection, why don't we just have our staff ponder all this ad nauseum like you do so well, and then bring back to the board some well thought out specific recommendations that will help us with all this direction. Is that okay with everyone? And then Jack, do you have some more?
Yes, I did want to thank my fellow supervisors for taking up this matter. I think the discussion and debate was worthwhile. I've received a lot of communication from folks on this particular issue, and just the fact that you took it up and spent the time to go over it, to go through it, to ponder it, to add your recommendations and your thoughts is appreciated.
Thanks, Jack. Okay, we will now then take up our 10 o'clock timed item, which is Community Development Resources and the final hearing on the redistricting map, and it looks like Lauren is going to lead it off.
Good morning, Chairman Wygant, members of the board.
Morning, Lauren.
Lauren Clark with Community Development Resources Agency. It's a pleasure to bring to the board today in this your second public hearing on redistricting, hopefully the final supervisorial district boundary map and the necessary resolution and ordinance to introduce that item and hopefully a final action today. What I'd like to do this morning briefly is walk through a little bit how we got to this point, some information about the amount of public input we've had and the opportunities for the public to engage, and then present to you our final recommendations for adoption. As the board knows, this process really is a result of changes that have occurred in Placer County over the past 10 years that come to our attention via the federal census, the 2010 census in this particular case. And as we do know, there was rather significant population either shifts in Placer County or simply no population change, such as largely what happened in District 5, as contrasted with District 2, which saw a 112% increase overall. That disparity must be adjusted to be consistent with state law as well as federal law as it relates to elections and sort of the principle of one person, one vote, and thus we go through this process every 10 years. We must complete this process by November 1, so here we are on October 11th, obviously approaching that deadline, so we really do need to complete this. Otherwise, it goes into a 30-day mandatory review by a committee of 3. We'll discuss that if we get to that point this morning, but hopefully we're done today. The board directed staff to be sort of in charge of preparing various district boundary alternatives and to take that to the public. Other districts or other communities use commissions, they use various board-appointed committees to perform this task. In this case, it was the board's direction to have staff do that. We brought that to the board on a number of occasions, as well as bringing those alternatives out to the community and discussing with them. This process culminated in the 2 public hearings, one that occurred on September 13th, and then the second public hearing today, which are both mandated by the state elections code. There's a number of things that we have to consider and that we should consider, as well as things that were unique to Placer County that we wanted to consider. So, for example, you find in state law and statute issues of compactness and contiguity, certainly taking into consideration various communities of interest, which is particularly relevant here in Placer County, to minimize any deviation, any disparity in terms of overall representation of a district. Absolute parity would be 69,684 persons per district. There's some case law around 5% and 10%, and we've used that criteria in what we've brought to the board today. We were also to use, to the extent possible, the existing district boundaries. Not only does Placer County share these boundaries, but Placer County Water Agency and even some other districts as well, So as few changes as possible is also one of the underlying tenets that we had in this process. And then lastly, and I think most relevant to Placer County, is topography and geography. It is a unique county in the sense of how we are laid out between the Sierra Nevadas and the valley floor. In terms of overall population change, we grew about 10,000 per year. So it was a net gain of about 100,000 persons scattered across Placer County, but for the most part centered around Highway 65 and areas in the city of Roseville, Rockland, and the 65 corridor with the city of Lincoln. Overall, it's a 40% growth, a 4% growth per year. That is a rather substantial rate of growth from a base population of around 250,000 persons. In terms of achieving absolute parity, you can see on the slide to my left what is necessary to move around from boundary to boundary, from district to district. We took all those factors into consideration, and we did not, in the end, based upon the board's direction, achieve absolute parity, because to do so would have discounted some of those other issues that were of significance to us and are actually noted very specifically in the findings prepared for the board. In terms of public input, it was a substantial effort on the county's part. At the board's direction, the primary place that we went to engage the public the most was with the various municipal advisory councils. We also had a total of 4 workshops with the board and the 2 public hearings that I mentioned, and then a number of entities asked for a particular presentation, the last of which was the League of Women Voters just a month ago. In terms of the direction that we received at the first public hearing, which was on September 13th, 2011, you asked us to prepare a map that was originally based upon one that you had seen previously, known as Map Alternative E, modified. That map contains an overall deviation of 8.32%. You also directed us to make a small adjustment between Districts 1 and 2 in order to ensure that the annexation area, particularly the Sierra Vista specific plan that the city of Roseville is pursuing, I believe later on this week, is coterminous with the boundaries of District 1 and District 2. And then lastly, you directed us to prepare an ordinance for adoption. The District 1 and District 2 boundary is highlighted again to my left. You can see it's a relatively small shift in terms of the overall area. We did not make the boundary precisely along the Roseville annexation boundary because the city of Roseville's boundary, based upon their legal description, is based upon a future right-of-way. We needed to make the boundary shift based upon a property line. So the net difference, it's this very small triangle, is 0.29 acres in size. So we have drawn the District 1-2 boundary on a parcel line rather than on the annexation boundary, and that's based upon the direction from the county surveyor's office. We've brought this to the attention of the city of Roseville so that they know that we have a slight disparity in terms of the representation in this area.
Just, if I may, on that point.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, seek clarification on that point.
Yes. Okay. Sorry.
If possible, Warren, can you show where that particular triangle is, what we're talking about?
Yeah, if you look at this area right in here,
right,
it angles up to the northeast,
okay,
and it crosses over into this parcel right here.
Okay.
So this parcel actually has this very small right-of-way coming up
okay,
at an angle there to the north.
So that part of District 2 that in the future would develop out as the city of Roseville is technically in the middle of the road then, basically. Is that what you're saying?
Eventually, you will have the city, a right-of-way there, a publicly owned right-of-way being owned by the city.
There would be no Roseville residents on that parcel in District 2 according to the existing Sierra Vista map, and that's what we're kind of going off of. Is that right?
Correct. And the alternative also that we discussed with the city of Roseville is a minor boundary line adjustment.
Okay.
And it's my understanding that it is an activity that could occur after the LAFCO action.
Okay. And that's fine. That'd be great. I think the intent of this board in terms of keeping communities intact, I think more meant residents as opposed to roads. And so yes. I think that this still accomplishes that, knowing that that one small chunk is probably not going to contain too many residents right there in the middle.
There's no population within that third of an acre.
All right, thank you very much.
So here's the map. This is map alternative E modified and again modified again, consistent with the board's direction on September 13th. Again, it also contains this overall deviation spread amongst all the districts of 8.32%. Because of that, we've presented the board with a resolution which contains a number of findings that we recommend that you make to explain why we have a deviation. So we have a number of recommendations contained in the staff report. While not a recommendation, it's important to point out that while this is a discretionary action of the board, it is not subject to CEQA in the opinion of staff, so therefore there is no CEQA action that the board must take. You need to conduct a public hearing this morning. This would be your second public hearing that is mandated by the State Elections Code. Following the close of that public hearing, whatever deliberations you might have, then approve the Board of Supervisors resolution containing the findings of fact, and then secondly, approve the ordinance which repeals and replaces a number of sections of Chapter 1 of Placer County Code, which essentially is a series of meets and bounds descriptions. And in my closing remarks, I also want to point out that it's worth noting the work of Kelly Berger and his staff, the GIS staff, and CDRA. This process would not have been possible, and it would not have gone as smoothly if we hadn't had the good work of that staff, and obviously just excellent use of our commitment to GIS in this county, and also to Chuck Grant, County Surveyor, who went over and above to get these legal descriptions to you today, and I know that they are both in the audience this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Questions, comments by the board? See none, I will now do as per Lauren's recommendation and open the public hearing to anyone who would like to address the board on this issue. Please come forward, state your name.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Michael Garabedian with Friends of the North Fork. I have a handout here for the staff and the board members.
Give it to the clerk of the board, please. Thank you.
Following up on our comments at the first hearing, we have a concern that not having a rural district may be unconstitutional. And we are convinced that your process for making districts is unconstitutional. The handout lists the numbers. What we did after the last hearing is try to think, well, how would we draw a district? What basis would we have to draw a district? And we concluded that you don't have the basis. The numbers you have are necessary and essential to have, but what you don't have are the numbers that would allow you to protect the voting interests of the rural residents of Placer County. We can start at the top of the list. The land area in each district, incorporated and unincorporated area in each district. And now we get down to population. The rural population of each district. How can you even begin to try to deal with the representation of the rural population unless you have the numbers? You could just use the census definition of rural population so that you would know as you dealt with each district boundary what the rural population was in that area. Population density. This is a key indicator of what's going on in that district. We focused on the economic implications of rural representation last time. Economic population centers are something not as specific as the other numbers we've just given you that are needed, but kinds of things like the number of farms, the number of ranches, sawmills, services, information, financial equipment, service type centers, guides and outfitters. If there are communities that are related to the economic area that they're in the middle of that serve those needs of those economic needs that surrounded by them, not just incorporated but unincorporated communities. Of course, all the public lands are in one area. This might be a factor also, not as convincing a factor, but a key factor in having a person to represent the areas. We feel that in order to be sure you are making the right decision, you need to look at those factors and make sure you have acted to protect the rural interests based on those numbers.
Thank you for your comments. But Tony has a question for you.
This process has been going on for about 6 months, and several board meetings, including at least one on August 9th, August 23rd, August 13th, and today's hearing. Have you or your group submitted a proposed map for consideration to the Board of Supervisors that I'm unaware of?
We learned about this at the Forest Hill Divide Community Forum on June 6th, or June 5th or 6th. The next day, I submitted an email with some comments to planning, and I said, when are you going to be making other presentations on this?
Yes, if you'd answer the question I asked rather than give a speech,
Oh.
we might move along faster.
Okay.
Have you actually submitted a map?
No, we haven't.
Thank you.
This data needs...
All the question I asked, thank you.
You're welcome.
Have you submitted a map for anybody to review, consider, or any supervisor to see, and you've answered the question, the answer is no.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for your comments.
You're welcome.
Actually, I do have,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman, I do have another
Jack.
question. Sir, you're coming up here and you're saying that we're doing something unconstitutional. Have any at any time, and I do take an issue with that. I mean, we've got staff that have been working on this for a very lengthy time. Have you at any time submitted any case law that says what we are doing is unconstitutional?
I do not have a legal opinion to that effect.
Thank
no.
you very much, sir.
Kirk?
Yeah, just two quick things. You live where?
I live in Citrus Heights.
Citrus Heights. And you're qualified to speak on behalf of the rural areas of Placer County more so than I who live in Granite Bay.
We are an incorporated association with board members of property owners in this county and activists in this county.
Okay, I just, find it interesting that a resident of Citrus Heights is somehow more appropriately suited to speak on behalf of the rural interests of Placer County than an elected supervisor in Placer County. But that notwithstanding,
I didn't say that.
You did actually say factually that all the public lands are in one district. I'm curious what the Folsom Lake State Park is, because I have almost all of the Folsom Lake State Park in my district. Public land?
I was thinking...
Yeah, okay.
I made a
But from a
mistake. I was
factual
thinking of the
standpoint.
Forest Service lands, the BLM lands, which are substantially...
Given that the Folsom Lake
elsewhere.
State Park is the most used state park in the state of California, I think that from a factual standpoint, we might want to point out that I have in my district a very substantial chunk of public lands. Thank you.
I hope you would look to these numbers, sir.
And Jennifer, questions or comments?
Mike, I want to thank you for taking the time to comment today. However, I frankly don't share your concern. District 5 will be taking in the city of Auburn. The total population based on the most recent census data for District 5 will be 66,742 people, of which roughly 13,000 live in the city of Auburn, something less than 20% of the population of the district. The district is largely rural today and will remain largely rural after this board takes action. And frankly, Supervisor Holmes, Supervisor Wygant, and Supervisor Euler all have substantial rural sections of their districts. And I have seen a demonstrated commitment from this entire board and county staff to support Placer County's rural heritage. Now, you may take issue with that and you may have a different opinion, but I think that short of seeing a map, as Tony has suggested, short of seeing what the case law is that Supervisor Duran was asking you point to support your statement that this is an unconstitutional process, I would propose that our board move forward and adopt the new district maps today. But again, I thank you for taking the time to come and speak to us on this.
Well, you're welcome. We are, of course, looking ahead to what's happening. This is a major change to change the nature, not have, now that the suburban and urban areas are becoming such a heavy influence in every district, to not be addressing the needs of the agricultural areas and the other areas as we look to the future, that we are heading to a real problem.
Well, we sincerely hope that you will be here to advocate on behalf of those agricultural interests as we move forward over the next 10 years until our next census. So
Thank you. Me too.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else from the public who'd like to address the board on redistricting map? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for action.
I move we approve the Board of Supervisors resolution containing the findings of fact.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the Board of Supervisors resolution containing the finding of fact. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I move we approve the ordinance which repeals and replaces Placer County Code sections 1.08.010, supervisorial district boundaries, and sections 1.08.020, 1.08.030, 1.08.040, 1.08.050, and 1.08.060 meets and bounds descriptions of each district boundary.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the ordinance and the map just so eloquently described. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks. And I want to thank Lauren and Michael and County Exec's office and all the staff who helped make this effort go very
Kelly and Chuck.
constructively and effectively, so thanks. So our 10:15 timed item is facility services, termination of facility fee and adjustment of sewer connection fees. And I'll turn that over to, looks like, Bill?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I'm Bill Zimmerman with the Facility Services Department. This morning we're asking your board to conduct a public hearing, and at the end of that hearing to adopt ordinance revisions that will adjust the annexation, connection, and in lieu fees that we collect on behalf of our sewer districts. These are basically development fees that are collected at the time that a parcel either annexes into one of our districts or physically connects to the sewer system. The revenue that we receive from these fees is used to construct improvements within the districts, and so it's important that we keep them current in terms of inflationary increases. The fees were last adjusted in August of 2009, and the inflationary cost index specified by county code has increased 6.4% since that time. So that is the inflationary piece of the adjustments we have before you today. In addition, most of our connection fees include a $200 facility fee. The facility fee was established in 2003 to fund improvements to our utility shop, and that fee expires in November of this year, so we've included a $200 deduction to those connection fees. The existing and proposed fees are included in the ordinance revisions attached to our staff report. They're also summarized on page 2 of the staff report under supplemental background. And I would like to point out that the connection fees listed in the supplemental background are the fees that the county keeps for some of our regional districts that flow, for example, to the city of Roseville. There is a separate connection fee that's kept by those agencies. So to give you an example, for SMD2, the county's connection fee we're proposing is $1,632. There is another $6,500 that's payable to Roseville. So the total connection fee would be $8,179. I just wanted to clarify that. One thing that I would like to point out is that in most cases, the inflationary increase that we have before you is less than the $200 decrease associated with the facility fee. So for most of these fees, we're actually proposing a fee decrease. So with that as background, again, we're asking you to conduct a public hearing. At the end of that hearing, to adopt the ordinance revisions included with our staff report. And we are also asking you to make a finding pursuant to Section 21080B8 of the Public Resource Code that the fees are derived directly from the cost of providing service and are therefore exempt from environmental review. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Jennifer, do you have a question? I see no questions of the board members at this time, so I will open the hearing to the public. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to address the board on this? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the board.
Chair, I just have a question. I just want to clarify that these fees will not affect existing ratepayers. It's just all new growth.
That's correct. It's strictly for new development.
Right. Okay. Then I move approval, sir.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the staff recommendation, which is, I think, already been discussed, but includes the adoption of the ordinance and making the findings as it relates to the nexus between the cost of providing the service and the service itself. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
So we will now go back to our department items, and the first remaining department item, both are with Health and Human Services. First one is Community Health, Public Health Preparedness, and Mark is going to present that for us.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board.
Good morning, Mark.
Mark Starr, Director of Community Health Clinics and Animal Services. I have both of these items. The first one, item 8A, requests the necessary approvals to continue to accept federal and state funding for our public health emergency preparedness program. This cooperative agreement begins a new 5-year grant cycle. Over this period, local health departments will be required to address 15 critical public health preparedness capabilities that are described in new national standards. This is a bit of a transition from the past, but these capabilities will build on our work and successes of the preceding years. Placer County has been operating this program since 2002. The focus during prior years has been on preparedness capacity assessment, identifying needs, building infrastructure, establishing collaborations with our community partners, developing plans, participating in drills and exercises, which I'll tell you about one of those exercises in a moment, assisting with response to public health emergencies such as H1N1, and participating in disaster responses here in the county, including fires and sheltering in times of heat or cold or other needs. So I'd like to mention just a few examples of some of these successes from just the last year alone. The first one is over 197 individuals from numerous partner agencies in the realm of healthcare, emergency responders, medical transportation, and others joined our department in a simulated evacuation of a long-term healthcare facility. This was done at Sienna Care Center right here in Auburn. This exercise I bring up primarily because it was so successful and it was quite unique, and it was cited as a cutting-edge model for other jurisdictions in California. Our program was recognized by the Department of Public Health with an award at the statewide Public Health Conference, Preparedness Conference in August, for successfully incorporating skilled nursing facilities into our overall preparedness planning. In addition, the program completed 40 site assessments for points of dispensing medication in a time of crisis, potential bioterrorism, and mass shelter locations throughout the county. The shelter site assessments conducted in partnership with the Red Cross I wanted to highlight here because they were most recently utilized in support of the response with the City of Lincoln in the lead to the Lincoln propane tank fire. And lastly, I'll mention that our public health laboratory recently received final certification from the Federal Centers for Disease Control, the FBI, and the Department of Public Health as a comprehensive white powder laboratory. What this means is that we were approved to test for all of the called select agents, the high-risk agents that everything from anthrax to ricin toxin that might be used as terrorism agents, and can test white powder samples that are brought to our lab. So the action requested is simply that your board approve this one-year agreement with the California Department of Public Health in an amount not to exceed $891,000. This is about a 15% decrease from the prior year. Our program can adapt to this with some staff reductions and is still 100% federally and state funded. We also ask that you sign the required non-supplantation certification form and authorize the Director of HHS to sign subsequent amendments and certifications that may be required. And of course, I'm available for questions.
Any questions? Seeing none. Anyone from the public have any questions? Seeing none. Pleasure of the board. Moved and seconded to approve the just discussed item. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries, and congratulations on the recognition, by the way.
Thank you.
And our next item is Community Health, Women, Infants, and Children Program.
So item 8B requests the approvals needed to continue to accept these federal funds come to us via the State Department of Public Health for the 100% federally funded WIC program. Before I proceed, I need to mention there's a typo on the agenda item. The board packet is correct, but the agenda has a few extra zeros, making this $1 billion program. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah. So the correct number we'll get to in a moment. The Placer County Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, as we affectionately know it as WIC, provides participants with access to scientifically selected, nutrient-rich foods, information on healthy eating, and referrals to health care. This program serves pregnant women, new mothers, infants, and children up to the age of 5 who are low income and at nutritional risk. Research has shown that WIC is cost-effective, saving more than is spent, considerably more, that WIC children are healthier than eligible children that don't participate in the program, and that it better prepares them for school. Each year, women and children in Placer County's WIC program have access to over $3 million worth of healthy foods from local grocers with program-issued vouchers. These foods are specifically targeted to supplement the diets of over 4,300 participants each month. The vouchers provide supplemental fruits, vegetables, whole grains, cereals, milk, cheese, eggs, and other healthy items to these participants. Nutrition and health education are also provided to WIC clients with an emphasis on healthy eating habits for life, and we even include a few cooking classes in their education. They're also given support and information about breastfeeding, given help in finding health care and other community resources, and referrals for food stamps. And interestingly, our program is one of those that has begun working with our local farmers market beginning last year, so WIC participants can utilize their vouchers to purchase foods at our locally grown foods at our farmers markets and also help support our farmers. Taken together, the value of the WIC vouchers and the federal program funds that support our operations contribute over $4.5 million to the Placer County community. No county general fund match is required. So the action requested is to approve a funding application with the California Department of Public Health for the WIC program coming federal fiscal year in the maximum amount of $1.2 million, to sign all required application documents and the resulting contract, and to authorize the Director of HHS to sign any amendments. Any questions on this one?
Questions by the board? Seeing none, anyone from the public? Seeing no questions, what's the pleasure of the board? It's moved and seconded to approve the funding application with the Department of Public Health for the WIC program as discussed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much.
We will now adjourn into closed session. Tony?
The board would go into closed session, take up the items on page 3, item number 9, one litigation matter, and perhaps some labor discussions. And report back later.